Bonjour, aujourd'hui j'aimerais parler d'autre chose que du docteur Gillan, même si je ne me lasserai jamais d'essayer de prononcer son nom correctement. J'aimerais parler du capitalisme. Rien de grande envergure, juste ce que j'aperçois du bout de ma bien trop étroite lorgnette. Pendant la quasi-totalité de ma vie, je me suis trouvé politiquement à la gauche de la gauche de la gauche. Égalité pour tous, liberté pour tous, je voyais le capitalisme comme un instrument d'oppression qui réduit l'homme en esclavage et détruit la nature. Je suis toutefois d'avis que le capitalisme est en effet... Je suis toujours d'avis que le capitalisme est en effet un instrument à double tranchant dont il faut se méfier. Toutefois, j'ai commencé à le percevoir aussi comme un outil fantastique pour sortir les gens de la pauvreté. Ce qui, pour ceux comme moi qui ont des intuitions de leur tempérament gauchiste égalitaire, ne va pas de soi. C'est une présentation de Jonathan Haidt intitulée « Trois histoires du capitalisme » qui a achevé de cimenter ma transformation.
I'm going to tell you 3 stories about capitalism, but these stories are going to make a lot more sense if we start by stepping back, taking the big picture, and asking, how did we get here? So I'm going to ask it 3 ways. First, let's ask it about the universe. So we pose this question to our astrophysicists, and they tell us about the Big Bang, about the expansion and cooling of the universe. Now, they may not agree on all the details, but their disagreements are scientific disagreements. They're not moral disagreements. People work together. They're making rapid progress. All right, let's zoom in. Let's ask it about our species. How did we get here? So now we turn to our paleontologists and evolutionary experts, and they tell us about the 6 million year story of the hominid family tree. They tell us how our ancestors came down from the trees, we became bipedal, we mastered tool use, we became hunter-gatherers. But now here you begin to see some intrusions from morality, because evolution has always been controversial. Scientists' beliefs about race and gender, for example, have influenced their thinking about evolution from Darwin's time to ours. But these intrusions are relatively small, and this scientific community is also working well, making rapid progress. All right, let's zoom in one more time. How did we get here to our modern societies? How did we get to New York and London and Zurich? And how did we achieve this incredible cornucopia in just the last few centuries? Even more amazingly, how did the Chinese do it in just the last few decades? So now we turn to our economists and our historians to explain to us how we got here. But now the morality and the politics are right there on the surface, because the scholars themselves tend to be either fans or critics of capitalism. And if you know an economist's political leanings, you can make a fair guess on what they think about questions like austerity versus stimulus. And this is even more true of our political leaders. But if our experts can't agree on basic economic facts, how are we going to make good policies in the 21st century? A really great insight into where we are and what's happening to us comes from a 1973 article with a very dry title, Dilemmas in a General Theory of Planning. Horst Riddle and Melvin Weber analyze the 2 very different kinds of problems that experts work on. So there are tame problems, which are things like curing cholera. So cholera killed tens of millions of people in the 19th century. It's caused by a waterborne bacterium. And so you get the experts together, you put down water systems, sewer systems, people start buying toilets, problem solved. It's wiped out. Cholera gets wiped out in the developed world. Tame problems are definable, understandable, and consensual. The experts agree on what the problem is, and we have clear metrics, so we know when we've solved it. Wicked problems are things like poverty, or racism, or global warming. With wicked problems, the experts themselves are shaped by their moral and political values. They bring those in just to frame the problem, and this is why they don't converge. This is why they don't agree. I recently read this really fantastic article by Ted Nordhaus and Michael Schellenberger on the amazingly wicked problem we're having in America right now with increasing political polarization and paralysis. So they wrote this wonderful article applying Riddle and Weber to the current state of what's happening in America. And speaking with the general theory, they say, experts could only define wicked problems in relationship to background solutions, which are themselves shaped by underlying values and a vision of the good society. As a result, disagreements over social and environmental policy cannot be resolved by experts, who in many ways make the problem more intractable. So think about it like this. For tame problems, it's easy to get the facts. I mean, there might be some technical challenges, but once you've got the right tools, those tools work the same for everyone, regardless of your politics. You look through the microscope, you see the bacterium. It doesn't matter whether you're on the left or the right. But when you're doing social policy work, the tools, it's like Alice playing croquet with a live flamingo and a live hedgehog. The tools are always moving around, except that for policy work, the tools are a lot more cooperative than that flamingo because the tools kind of help you to reach the conclusion that you want to reach. Now, I don't want to overstate things. Economists do reach consensus. They do reach agreement on many difficult issues. But the fact remains that for almost any policy dispute, for almost any debate we have in our society, you can find some experts who will back you up. And the reason is because within every society, on the left and the right, people have different visions of what democratic capitalism should look like. And to understand those visions, you have to understand the stories that people are telling about capitalism. Now, I'm a social psychologist, and I've studied morality for 27 years. And one thing that I've learned that I'm pretty confident about is that you can't really convince people on moral and political issues by giving them facts. And the reason is because human reasoning does not take place in a logical world based on facts. It takes place in an emotional world based on stories. And we don't even write these stories. We imbibe them, we drink them in as we grow up. We may not even be able to tell them ourselves, but when we see something, we hear something that fits with our favorite stories, we get a feeling of familiarity, and that tags it as true. So since the global financial crisis, I've been listening to the stories told by left and right about capitalism, and there are two main variants. It's so helpful to have names for these stories. It's so helpful to make them visible. And my hope is that if everybody has names for them and we can see them and maybe even laugh at them, we can make our problems a little bit less wicked. So what I did was, to prepare for coming here, I figured, okay, I can't just give a standard academic talk, but better make it a little more fun, more compelling. So I hired a video company to animate. I wrote out the stories, and I hired a video company to animate the two stories. So here they are.
Once upon a time, work was real and authentic. Farmers raised crops, and craftsmen made goods with their own hands. But then, capitalism was invented, and darkness spread across the land as the smokestacks of the Industrial Revolution covered everything in soot. The capitalists became ever more skilled at extracting productivity from workers and pocketing the gains from their labor. The workers eventually fought back by unionizing. In the early 20th century, as the brutality and stupidity of capitalism were exposed, many governments granted workers some protection from the predators. Democratic welfare states were born. But the capitalists and their right-wing cronies were unrelenting, and in many countries, they have destroyed the unions, slashed regulations, and given the corporations free rein to exploit at will. So, the rich get richer, the rest of us get poorer, our democracy gets weaker, and the planet gets hotter. It is now the duty of every decent person to join the fight against global capitalism and the super predators it has unleashed upon us.
So what do you think? Does that feel true? Does it feel familiar and true, or does it feel strange and vaguely irritating to you? Here's the second story.
Once upon a time, almost everyone was a peasant, a serf, or a slave. Kings and feudal lords took most of what people produced, so nobody had much reason to work hard. But then, in the 17th century, capitalism was invented and the liberation began. In England, Holland, and America, they discovered that when you give people property rights, the rule of law, and free markets, you turn on a switch in their hearts. People want to work when they can keep the fruits of their labor. They want to invent new products, provide for their children, and be useful to others. Free market capitalism enables them to do these things. In the 20th century, some countries embraced communism and centralized planning, always with the same result: shortages of everything, including food and freedom. But countries that embraced capitalism have grown prosperous in a single generation. Yet, despite the evidence of history, the left-wing egalitarians are unrelenting. And whenever they get control of a government, their first target is economic freedom. The egalitarians don't want to live in a world in which people who create more value for others get to enjoy more wealth for themselves. They'd rather that everyone be equal and equally poor. It is now the duty of every decent person to join the fight to protect capitalism and to extend its blessings to all of humankind.
Okay. So I guess in Zurich, is that second story more popular? Is this a very capitalist city? So these stories resonate or they don't resonate, but they shape the mental space within which we do our thinking, because what we believe drives what we perceive. So here's a very simple demonstration. What do you see here? Do you see a triangle sitting on top of three circles, or do you see three partially eaten pizzas? Okay. This effect is so compelling because most people can make out the edges. Can you see the slight edges of the triangle even between the circles? Nod your head if you can see those edges a little bit. Okay, now watch. I'm going to make them go away just by covering up two of the circles because they're not really there. Your brain is guessing that the most likely thing out in the world that would cause that is a triangle on three circles. And so then your brain tries to confirm the guess that it just made. And we're usually pretty good at confirming our guesses as long as there's any ambiguity. Again, what we believe drives what we perceive. This is the basic idea behind the Rorschach test. The idea was if you give people an ambiguous figure, all their unconscious stuff is going to project out onto this ambiguous figure. That was the idea. Now, it turns out the Rorschach test doesn't really tell you much about the unconscious, but I made a better Rorschach test. Ready? What do you think? Is that the world's greatest economist who wrote the world's most important book, or is it just another left-wing it's just another left-wing academic justifying high taxes on the rich? If you read the reviews of Piketty's book, well, if you know the politics of the reviewer, you kind of know what the review is going to say. So again, what we believe drives what we perceive. There's a great example of this from Paul Krugman. He's been pulling his hair out at some of these European leaders who seem wedded to austerity despite what he believes is the overwhelming evidence that it's a bad idea. And after years and years of writing these columns and wondering why do they keep clinging to austerity, he wrote this in a column about a year and a half ago. Some powerful people have a visceral sense that suffering is good, that we must pay a price for past sins, even if the sinners then and the sufferers now are very different groups of people. Some of them see the crisis as an opportunity to dismantle the safety net. So when I read that, I thought, wow, that's really good moral psychology. And then my second thought was, I actually have the data to test that. So I run a research site. I do most of my research at a site called yourmorals.org. We've had almost 500,000 people come take some of our many surveys. And so I looked through some of the surveys on fairness and things like that, and I found 3 items that very closely match Krugman's claims about the psychology driving this. So here are 3 in 3 different colors. When people come to this site, they register as being either very liberal or on the left, using the American word liberal, very on the left or the right, and so that's what's graphed along the x-axis. So the first question, the world would be a better place if we let unsuccessful people fail and suffer the consequences. People who are on the left say, whoa, that sounds terrible. No, I reject that. But people on the right, as you move to the right, conservatives actually agree with that statement. Here's another one. Life would have very little meaning if we never had to suffer. And this is exactly matching Krugman's predictions. Liberals, or people on the left, slightly disagree with it. They're pretty close to neutral. But as you get more conservative, you agree with it more. So Krugman is right. Conservatives do have a more positive view of suffering. And here's the third one. It's usually better to show mercy than to take revenge. Now, here the line slopes down because it's liberals who strongly agree with it and conservatives only slightly agree with it. So if these are some of the differences in the moral intuitions on left and right, how do you think people are going to respond to the question of should we use austerity or stimulus? If you're on the left, it's obvious that we need to bail people out who are suffering, even if they might have contributed partially to their failure. But if you're on the right, it's just as obvious that that would be a disastrous thing to do. You're just going to enable them to do it more and more. No, better to impose some discipline, some strictness, let them learn from their lesson, let them grow from the suffering, and then things will be better in the long run. If that's the situation, if that's where we are, if our leaders are driven in part by their moral beliefs, as Krugman argued, How are we going to solve all these wicked problems? Not just poverty, but all of these other problems that are getting more and more wicked as we get more educated, as we get wealthier, our problems actually get more wicked. We all become experts. We all have opinions. We're all good at post hoc justification. How are we going to solve these problems? Maybe we can bridge the divide with a third story. Maybe we can come up with a story that everyone can embrace. We can get more on the same page. And I think we can do this. I think that the way to do this is to integrate the first two stories as follows. When I moved to the Stern School of Business about 3 years ago, I had this really contradictory experience that kind of forced me to integrate these stories. So I moved there in July of 2011, and a few months later, Occupy Wall Street breaks out. And it's all over the news. And I had a lot of sympathy with them at first. I mean, hundreds of millions of people had lost their jobs around the world. All kinds of disasters were happening because of the recklessness and even criminality of some people in the financial sector. So I had a lot of sympathy for that. And then I was teaching a business ethics course. And we'd go through case after case of businesses doing all these terrible things and pressing their employees to do all these terrible things. And most of them were legal. So, I'm immersed in all of this negative stuff about business. And I see that there's some truth to story one. But at the same time, everyone around me in the business school is talking about creating value, creating value. It's all about creating value. And at first, business has a lot of buzzwords, and I'm, creating value. So, I sort of write it off as, But then, as I start reading about the history of capitalism, and I start reading Adam Smith, and then I see this graph, and this just changed me forever. This is the most amazing graph I have ever seen. So let me explain this to you. This is a graph of GDP per capita in constant $1990, graphing it out from the year 1 on the far left all the way through 1950 by the different regions of the world. So what you see here is that everybody in the world was living on about $400 a year. That's a little over $1 a day. Just about everybody is living at starvation wage, its level of starvation, for thousands of years. And you can see Western Europe bumps up just a little bit after 1500 because you get mercantile capitalism. You're moving stuff around, so Europe gets a little wealthier. But it's not until you get the Industrial Revolution, it's not until you get industrial capitalism, which makes stuff, huge amounts of stuff cheaply, it's not until then that you get things really taking off. The West skyrockets, especially America. And if that transition, if that transformation in just 150 years doesn't blow you away, look what happened in the next 50 years. Okay? And that data only goes up to the year 2000. Since 2000, the West has slowed down. It's still growing, but it's slowed down, whereas the rest of the world's catching up. So when you really see this, when you appreciate this, when you see what happens, you realize that creating value isn't just a buzzword. It's actually a moral imperative. Because when you get this process going in previously poor countries, this is what happens to poverty. So in 1820, it's estimated that about 95% of the people on this planet were living on around $1.25 a day of current value. And by 2010, it's down to 21%. And it's still dropping rapidly. Can you imagine that? Poverty has gone from being the state of almost everybody to being, it will soon be the state of very few people. This is arguably the most important event in human history. But because it was spread out over 200 years, a lot of people seem to have missed it. So let's take, for example, this fellow. He's a famous actor and economist, Russell Brand. And he recently wrote this book in which he argues that our system, capitalism, is designed to behave like this. It generated wealth for the wealthy and further impoverishes those with nothing. Asking it to behave differently is like asking a microwave to wash your car. But this is just completely wrong. I think there's really no alternative but to starting with a liberation story. But you can't stop there because every story clues you into certain facts, but it blinds you to others. So the way I see it, capitalism is liberation, but the way it liberates is by unlocking the incredible innovative spirit of humanity. And part of that innovation is ever new forms of exploitation. I mean, people get really clever, like this guy here. You got to hand it to this guy for having the foresight for buying the domain name Ebola.com and then selling it back when the disease hit. But what concerns me isn't sleazebags who hang out on the edges of otherwise decent markets. What concerns me is that there's been a shift in thinking about business, certainly in America, and I think it's spreading elsewhere. Business is about competition, but it's a lot more about Cooperation. There's a lot more cooperation than competition. Stakeholder theory is the view laid out originally by Ed Freeman at the University of Virginia, but this is the way many businesses have always operated without having a name for it. It's the idea that businesses, all these cooperative relationships, and a leader is going to want to cultivate these relationships, want to make sure that they're mutually beneficial. When you take a stakeholder view, you value all these relationships, then the exploitation story becomes irrelevant. But what's been happening is a shift since the 70s to what's called the shareholder primacy view. This is articulated by Milton Friedman in his famous quote that there is one and only one social responsibility of businesses, and that is to increase its profits. So when you see the firm as something that is owned by the shareholders, the executives work for the shareholders, they have a duty to maximize the shareholders' returns, therefore everybody else is a profit opportunity. And if you squeeze them just enough, you squeeze them the right way, you can actually increase the returns to shareholders. So for example, you can squeeze the employees, and many companies have found ingenious ways to withhold wages, to not pay overtime, especially in times of high unemployment. It's easy to squeeze the employees. You can squeeze your customers, as GM did, by hiding safety defects for years and years when they could have fixed it cheaply years ago, saved over 30 lives. You can squeeze the communities you work in. Why spend all that money on environmental protection? Let them drink your toxins. And the worst offenses come to the suppliers, especially in the age of globalization when they're sometimes very far away. So this is the Rana Plaza building outside of Dhaka, Bangladesh. It housed many companies, including some garment makers. On April 23rd of 2013, cracks were found in the building. The building was evacuated. But that evening, many of the garment makers told their workers, if you don't come to work tomorrow, you're docked a month's wages. So many of them returned. The building collapsed. 1,100 of them were killed, mostly young women. So we can get angry at those Bangladeshi subcontractors and contractors, but part of the reason they behave so brutally is that they're being squeezed so tightly by the Western brands, by the Western clothing companies, who want to get it down to the very, very lowest price, and they keep pitting them against each other, and they'll move the contract around for a penny. So, so what can we do? My view is that capitalism is liberation. It enables constant innovation, including new forms of exploitation. So there is some truth to both stories. And we have to constantly be vigilant for these new forms of exploitation. We have to push back against them, ideally with social means, moral means, financial means, and when necessary, with legal means. What we're hoping to get is dynamism with decency. Now, sometimes there's a trade-off. Sometimes by being nice to everyone, you'll sacrifice dynamism. But very often there is no trade-off, or they're complementary. Two quick examples. This is from the site glassdoor.com. So the web enables all kinds of feedback. People can now rate their employers and their former employers. You give star ratings, and if companies squeeze their employees too much, they're going to find it harder to hire good workers. So it's a way of pushing back. Here's a really inspiring one. At the NYU Stern Center for Business and Human Rights, after the Rana Plaza disaster, they held some meetings. They got all the major players over to New York, the Western brands, the garment makers, the representatives of the unions, government, everybody. And they held a series of closed-door meetings, no press. And they worked out a set of new standards of ways to raise worker safety and working conditions, because the idea was before you had all this competition, nobody wanted to spend a penny more than they had to. But if you raise the standards for everybody, then nobody is put at a competitive disadvantage. You get much more decency with no cost of dynamism, and of course if the workers aren't dying and if they're safe, you get more dynamism. So there are so many ways that we can get both dynamism and decency. They're not necessarily opposed. This, I think, is what we need to be aiming for. And if we can do that, if we can accept that there is some truth to both stories, and we don't demonize each other, and we say, okay, well, maybe I don't know the whole story myself. Maybe you have a piece of the puzzle. If we can learn from other people and come to see this dynamic of dynamism and decency, then our societies will flourish, our journey will continue, and the stars will be the limit.
Ce qui m'a transformé, c'est l'idée de la fonction du capitalisme. Si on voit le capitalisme comme un moyen pour les riches de s'enrichir sur le dos des pauvres, ce n'est pas défendable. Mais si l'on accepte que c'est le capitalisme qui permet de créer la richesse, qui extrait l'humanité de la pauvreté la plus abjecte, alors la discussion change et il s'agit de discuter des modalités du capitalisme. Ces conditions dans lesquelles il lui est permis de fonctionner. En tout cas, ce qui ne fait plus aucun doute dans mon esprit, c'est que jamais dans l'histoire de l'humanité nous n'avons inventé un moyen aussi efficace d'enrichir la population, comme l'a très bien montré Jonathan Haidt. Le capitalisme a ses défauts, la démocratie aussi. On pourrait être tenté de se détourner d'eux comme ce fut le cas par le passé. Mais il est important de ne pas oublier que ça n'a pas fonctionné. Peu importe la manière dont on veut le tourner ou le retourner, le capitalisme est le moins mauvais moyen d'enrichir la population et la démocratie est le moins mauvais moyen d'organiser le vivre ensemble. Les deux demandent une vigilance de tous les instants pour ne pas les laisser se corrompre en une parodie destructrice de ce qu'ils peuvent être de mieux, mais le potentiel et les performances antérieures de ces deux systèmes me réconfortent dans l'idée qu'ils nous permettront de survivre le temps d'arriver à nos lendemains qui chantent. Ceux de l'abondance technologique, la vie éternelle et la civilisation intersidérale. Histoire de mettre les choses un peu en perspective.